if you're working on something that's going to help people, an educational resource, tutorial sequence, a book, or whatever it is, reminder that it doesn't actually help people until they have some access to it, until it's out there. Now, that's not the same as saying it's finished. We're going to talk about the relationship between these two things. And there was a recent article about patching on games and where that fits in the marketplace, people who argue about to and fro, and we're not discussing the article today, but there's certainly going to be some overlap between today's point and how it relates to what that article was touching some related topics of. But the idea comes down to this. It's that we had within Gamketo Club a member developing a resource for members to use, and he was thinking, well, maybe he could get to it by March, which by this point maybe a month or two away. And I was like, okay, well, what's the version you could have within a week, right? Because just like we talked about with scale for anything else, especially in a modern authorship environment, there's like the 1 day version, the 1 week version, the 1 month version, the 1 year version, the 10-year version, etc. And so my point was, okay, if we can press down and prioritize to what's the 1 week version of this, then we can put that in front of other members in a way it's going to help them, start helping them immediately, and then we can continue to upgrade, improve, and iterate on it. But this has several positive effects. One, this gets us to prioritize what's the most important core thing. It keeps us from putting off the stuff that really matters. Because sometimes what happens, we give ourselves a huge window of time, we kind of start finding ways to do what are, in essence, filler tasks. We've never framed that way to ourselves. We've never talked to ourselves that way about what's going on in our schedule. But the reality about the part that's really going to make a difference in addressing the core need or answering the key question, that gets kind of put off till later because it seems more important, more significant, something to build up to, as opposed to if you just put it out there in a format people can use, you have got to prioritize, okay, what's the high level? What's the breakdown? What's the overview so we can get started with it? And then another effect happens where you've kind of figured out the overarching view. You can go back in and splice in and reprioritize based on where are people actually hitting questions, where are they actually stuck, where are they actually having problems and interfacing with it. This was the same way that essentially I designed my video courses, in which worked with people privately, just sort of one-on-one in person, realized that that would work well to adapt that material into a book, wrote the textbook, worked with people then with a textbook, realized that if I further adapted that material and the questions that they asked me into a video course, I could better embody that stuff. But that was a multiple layer kind of stepped process where each step of the way I was figuring out, okay, I've released some version of this, which is not its final form, which is not its ultimate version. In fact, I actually kept releasing for many months updates to that textbook. Additions, improvements, switch outs. At one point did a total rewrite and changed the programming language that was being used there and all kinds of things. But it began from putting it out there in a form which was enough. Minimal viable product, of course, the term from startup scene or small business world. But it's this idea that by putting it out there, it becomes usable by people. It becomes useful to us as the author in a way that we can start getting real information about what matters, what doesn't, where's our attention best spent on improving or wrapping this up. Additionally, another thing that it does for us is that it gets us more serious about prioritizing it. It gets us realizing that it's really being used by people. It's really of interest to people. It really is going to make a difference if we fix it now versus if we fix it 3 months in the future. One of the things that happens is if we haven't yet put it out there in any form, not open beta, not a prototype, not an early draft, whatever. I mean, the same sort of thing going on with like getyourselfthroughthings.com. I send out these videos, which are essentially kind of like early proto forms of the material I'm developing, getting feedback and responses from it. And something that already it's impacting people, it's reaching people, it's finding its audience, it's getting feedback and corrective notes from them that I can then factor into the final results. But the fact that there's an audience there who is appreciating it, who is waiting for the next message, who's involved and engaged, helping me shape that material and improve it, helps keep me on track in doing it. Does that make sense? Well, it's actually some of the same reasons why, for example, in Gamketo Club, when we have our release dates, which I'm confident, happy to say, out of the more than 40 games our club's released in the past couple of years, every single time we hit that release date, there's kind of one asterisk exception. There was a literal family emergency, things that moved around. It's just a club. It's not a commercially shipped product. It was fine. But for the most part, notwithstanding extremely rare circumstances, we always release on time. And notice I say release. I didn't say finish. Right? I mean, we say we release. The game goes on the website. That is then when the public could access that game. Now, after it's released, the developers continue to make updates to it, continue to kind of put a few more kind of maybe polish passes on difficulty tuning or on making some last adjustments or on realizing where the problems are. But again, one of the things that are happening is that once it's up there, we are driven to fix it because we know that someone might see it in a less than ideal state. Right? It's the same sort of thing that happens from, if we put up a website and the website's kind of like a work in progress. Maybe it's got a resume on it, maybe it's our LinkedIn profile, whatever it is. Once it exists in even the smallest of forms in a publicly accessible way, we are pulled to want to keep going back and making improvements to it. Because it's there, because people might see it, because, you know, they got us. We don't want people to see it in less than the best shape it can be. But part of what this is about is that literally by the process of having put it out there, not only is it driving us to do a better job with it sooner, it's actually literally equipping us with a much better perspective on what's important to address. Where's our energy best spent and prioritized to improve this in a way that makes a difference for the real audience it's reaching, and the real context that it's finding them. And this is part of what's so great about it. Now, I realize, again, this is only a loose thread to connect it to that discussion today about patching games and all that. And obviously, I'm talking about a more broad example here, although it does apply to some of our club games. This is something that obviously is a change from how things were when we were kids, depending on what age you are. Certainly when I was a kid, I'd buy a finished product in a box. But it's also the case that, for example, when they made Pac-Man for the arcade, part of why it took a team of maybe about a dozen engineers a full year is because once they shipped that wooden cabinet all over the world with all kinds of little buttons and switches and levers in there, and a power supply and all kinds of conditions, they could never fix or improve it. They could never make changes to it. It had to be released in that state. You know, there's a bug in like Space Invaders, not Space Invaders, Galaga, where literally on most of the way that the machines were shipped, if you know about the bug, you can kind of get a pretty easy high score if you exploit the bug. It's part of why people require videos sometimes for high scores and things. That's its own kind of rabbit trail conversation. But they didn't have the ability to do it, and so it was extremely inefficient to do. It required a whole bunch of guesses up front, a whole bunch of, crossing our fingers when we release it that I hope people will like this. I hope that this will resonate with people. In some games, Galaga Pac-Man did. A lot of games didn't. It was incredibly wasteful. Because one of the nice things about when we put it out there and we start kind of gauging response is that also starts to equip us with, is this project even the priority? Are people even responding to it in its prototype form? Are enough people engaged in what this is that I'm going to balance my time differently between that and my other possible things I'm working on? Right? So, this is how I've grown the club. It's how I've grown my podcast. I've grown my YouTube, etc. Is for a while having it in there in a way that I started it. I was trying it out. I was seeing how it goes. And as it does or doesn't pick up different audience levels, I'm able to reprioritize my time around what's really working and what isn't, in addition to all these other benefits. We get that feedback that equips us because we've put it out there. And I know that people don't like to think about it this way, but part of what's happening when a company releases a game that still could use some patching, that still could use some further refinement and so on, part of what's going on in those cases is that they are, as a business entity, in a way which I think nobody but them is in a position to either have the right to that decision or that choice or that consideration, they're trying to weigh how much more is it worth investing our limited time and resources and opportunity cost into this project as opposed to some others. And that's part of where they're gauging the response to it. And if it does enormously well, they're going to double down, reinvest that energy into it. And if it's scarcely a blip on the radar, that's their feedback that they might be able to more successfully entertain more people and keep their business going longer if they tie up the loose ends in the quickest way possible and then move on to the next thing. But that's part of what's going on there. And it's this power of the fact that realizing our thing isn't helping or entertaining or teaching or otherwise improving the lives of anyone else until we put it out there in some form, even if it's a rough copy, even if it's a work in progress. You can explain that's what it is, right? I like to think of these old GeoCities GIFs of the construction sites. Love those things. But it's all about getting it out there in first form. Same reason why, I know we mentioned a little bit earlier, why it's so valuable to be starting a resume or CV well before you need it. Because it's one of those things where the fact that it's there, the fact that it's public, the fact that it's linked from your LinkedIn or your personal site or whatever, allows you to kind of feel this pressure to go back and make improvements, tinker with it, improve its layout a little bit, rethink how you word things to be a little more efficient, rethink your format, ask for feedback from your friends because you know that there might be eyeballs on it. And that means that by the time you do suddenly need it, when you need it on short notice, you've got it iterated on in a way it's going to stand out compared to the ones who just wrote it last night, who just crammed together, top of their head, the best things they could remember. It helps to have things in place and out there while we iterate them. And that's something that technology now enables us to do so we don't have nearly as much guesswork. Why there's not so much high upfront energy expenditure and risk absorbed by the possibility that, hope everything turns out right because we only get one shot at it. We're in a highly connected digital world now where you can do these sort of experiments, make a lot of informed choices from it. And a lot of things that we all enjoy came from that process. or were only possible because someone using that process was able to evaluate that the thing that nobody responded to wasn't really worth prioritizing compared to the things that we have the traffic, we have the numbers, we have the eyeballs, we have the views, we have the subscribers, etc. That's where we can direct our attention. Thanks as always for tuning in. I'd be curious here down below if there's a case where you have released something incomplete, work in progress, draft copy, while you are still working on improving it or updating or upgrading or taking it further. Be curious there in the comments what that was for you and how that experience went, so we can better kind of tie some other stories. I'll also say, obviously, this is the kind of message, this isn't exactly a piece of it, kind of message I'm working on, though, for the GetYourselfToDoThings.com video series and email series. If you'd like to catch those, sign up for the free list there, and you'll see what I'm talking about in terms of material I'm working on as I'm working on it, in a way that you, as the receiving side, can help engage with me, help me figure out how to improve that, so we further help more people get themselves to do the things they mean to do. Thanks again. Have another video for tomorrow.